Our next speaker is Ezra. Ezra has the great honor, this you have to show them, of course. Ezra is one of us. Ezra is a member of the Red Team. And when he's not doing important things, he works for Akamai in the research group for the WAF product, right?
Yep.
See, I even remembered. Ezra, the floor is yours.
Okay, I'm trying to make it project.
Great opportunity for us.
Hello, I'm going to be talking about full SQL injections. We basically make some analysis based on the malicious intents of real-world SQL attacks. What we're going to be presenting here is stuff that we actually saw in the lab. We are talking about some of the data that we, as Akamai, are able to see. So, first of all, who am I? I'm Ezra. I'm a security researcher at Akamai. I'm also a proud member of the Red Team and one of the organizers of the DEFCON 9723 group in Israel.
Take your shoes off.
What?
Take off your shoes.
So I heard that first that I need to take out my shoes, so I'm going to take the offer. Okay. Yes? Do you hear me? Okay. So, before I start with my talk, I want to tell you a little bit about what is Akamai and how can we do this kind of research. What can we as Akamai Yes? Oh, much better now. So, while we can speak about attacks in a global scale and how are we able to make this kind of research? So first of all, Akamai is a company that his main priority is to bring content from point A to point B on the fastest way possible. To be able to do that, we have more than 160,000 servers locating in more than 2,300 locations, which means that we are in more than 750 cities, 92 countries, and more than 1,000 networks, which translates into something like 2 trillion hits every day, which leads us to see around 780 million unique IP addresses every quarter, 13 trillion log lines per day, and 260 terabytes of compressed daily logs, which is something around between 50 and 30% of all the web traffic. We see a lot of stuff. And as you know, a lot of the stuff that happens in the internet, it's attacks. So from that corpus of information we have, we decided to take a look into the SQL injection attacks. We basically took 7 days of research data to be able to look into 2,000 applications. And from there, we saw something like 8.5 million different injection attacks, which is a lot. So the first question that we as researchers had is, what do the attackers try to do? So our first objective was trying to categorize what the attackers are actually doing. And as you know, the first step in an SQL injection attack is to try to identify if the application is actually vulnerable. And it's as simple as a simple quote and a statement that tries to bring us true, which is 1 equals to 1. It's something that the computer will always say, yeah, it's true, 1 equals to 1. And this is a very simple way to identify if the web application is vulnerable. As such, is the attack that we see the most. We see that something like 5 million of the attacks, of the 8 million attacks that we see, include the probing, because it's the first step, which is roughly 59% of all the attacks. So, as this is a very big number, as in most of the attacks that we see include this particular kind of strings, for the next statistics that I'm going to present, I'm going to do a normalized approach, where we will both present how much from the total ratio it is, and how much of the ratio without these particular attacks it means it is. So the first thing that we see, and that we see with a very big amount of attacks and intention of injections, is the trying to understand which backend the platform is running, which means, is it MySQL, is it Oracle, or is it Microsoft SQL? We saw roughly 1,300,000 attacks. This is very useful as an attacker. If you know that you are not attacking a MySQL database or an Oracle database, you will be able to optimize your selects later or your union selects later to that particular platform. You will be able to try to find the particular hashes for this platform or try to find exploits for this platform. And this is one of the reasons that we see so much attacks of this category. The next category that we saw, and actually we were a little bit surprised, is database content retrieval, which is what we in the internet had been used to see as the dumps. Whenever the attackers manage to hack into an application using SQL injection, one of the things they try to do is to gather the entire database. To do that, one of the techniques is, for example, union select, among many others. And we saw something like 129,000 attacks, which is only 1.5% of the complete ratio, and it's only 3.8% of the general ratio. So how can we explain that the attackers are not doing this much more massively? Why are we seeing such a small number of attacks? So what we saw that attackers are doing more are credential theft. When attackers can log in to the backend, and when the attackers can get credentials to the backend, they don't need to do all the noise related to the union selects and all the techniques that are used to gather the contents of the database. When you are admin, you can see everything. When you are admin, you can do everything you want. Even with some platforms like Drupal or WordPress or whatever, when you are admin, you can even inject code. You can perform actions that administrators perform. And this is probably one of the reasons that we see that most of the injection attacks try to get the credentials from the system. Another interesting kind of attack that we saw are the login bypass. This one you are all familiar with, and it's when you are presented with a username and password for, and it's simply an admin or 1 is equal to 1. As 1 is equal to 1, as the statement is true, the attackers get access to the backend. And here we saw only 5,000 attempts to this particular category. This actually came as a shock to us all, and we probably can explain why is the reason. If you remember in the old days, when you were doing an SQL injection, you were able to run commands to try to read system files, like trying to load etc password. As this attack technique got more used and more common in the industry, the default configurations of most of the database would not allow to read system files, which is one of the reasons why from the 8 million different attacks, we are only seeing 24 injections that are trying to do this particular attack technique. The next attempt of attack that we saw in the wild is attempts to shut down the database, which is kind of a denial of service, although it's not as malicious as what we are going to see next. In this particular scenario, the only thing that the system administrators would need to do would be to reboot or restart the particular instance of the server. And we're seeing only that 326 different injection attempts were trying to do this particular attack. What we saw a little bit more are attempts to do data corruption, to drop tables like the users, or drop the logs, or just drop everything. I don't know if you remember when there was a Stratford hack. After they finished stealing all the platform, all the database, all the usernames and passwords, what the attackers decided to go and to do was, well, I have everything. I don't care about them. Let's just drop the tables, drop the users, drop the content, and just delete all the information that is there. And we see that attackers are actually doing this. This is one of my favorite ones, defacement and content injection. So now the attackers were able to steal the entire database, and then they were able to drop all the tables, and they were making all the mischief that they could do. What they can do now that they have everything they could get, and what they try to do is try to inject content, which means just pointing the website to a stored XSS or whatever that will send the visitors of the website to a watering hole attack where they will be redirected to an exploit kit. So we're seeing some very interesting stuff. Attackers are not only hacking and pounding the web servers, but rather they're also using the servers that they managed to attack as platforms to infect users. So basically, quoting Seinfeld, the attackers are double dipping, are both stealing the database and both infecting the end users. And they are, as always, the final objective whenever there is an attack, it's to try to get remote command execution. We see a few attempts. Again, the number is small. And it could be also explained by the fact that nowadays most of the databases are secure by default against this kind of attacks. Since we move into more default installations of the platforms, most of the system commands that allow to actually execute activities in the system are restricted, and we don't see that anymore much often. So to summarize, malicious attackers use a lot of techniques. And there is not only data exfiltration, what we are seeing in the wild. We are seeing attempts to elevate privileges. We are seeing attempts to execute commands. We are seeing attempts to infect or corrupt the data. We are seeing attempts to deny service. We are seeing attempts to use these platform servers, watering holes. Attackers are getting more advanced, and us as defenders need to take in consideration this kind of activities. So that's my 15 minutes, and thank you very much.